What's up, everyone? LeVar J here. Thanks for coming to my channel. Today's episode is going to be about what branch of the military you should join and why. Depending on if you're a parent asking for your child to help them decide what branch they should come into, or if you're just trying to weigh out your options, this is a great resource for you. I'll make it as quick as possible, so I'll go over some of the positive and negatives of each branch and why I think that. I will be a little bit biased towards the Marines and the Army since I have served in both, but I was on a joint task force where I worked alongside Airmen and Navy, and I was even on a naval ship for 3 months. So I have some experience with almost every single branch. I even have experience with the Space Force, just got off a contract working for them, and I've been right beside them in some of their beginning stages, so I kind of understand how they work. We'll start off right off the bat with Space Force. Why your kid should join the Space Force, or why you should join the Space Force, is if you really enjoy tech. If you like coding, programming, hacking, software development, anything like that, the Space Force has the monopoly on that currently. They've basically consolidated a lot of jobs from other branches and pulled them into the Space Force to be able to do that. They have a job called super coders, which is literally teaching you how to code. As a software developer, I really wish I had had that option when I was in back in the day. I had to really maximize my network to try to get those kind of that kind of training in the Marine Corps, and it was not great training. But the Space Force has it. They're developing software left and right. They're doing a lot of cybersecurity type job-based tasks, and they basically have the monopoly on tech as far as it goes across the spectrum of four branches. A close second is the Air Force, but the Air Force now is, well, always has been primarily focused on air and satellites and things that go up, but the Space Force is even consolidating some of that stuff into their branch more than the Air Force, and they're pulling a lot of people over from the Air Force to go into the Space Force to do that. If you want a better quality of life, more money in bad environments, and you want a great network to get you, if you're not planning on staying in and you're not sure, the Air Force is a great option because they focus so heavily on the network and building the network and getting to know people, understand people, and befriend people all over the world, that your network really grows. So they set you up for success outside of the Air Force, not just in the Air Force. And if you plan to stay in, your network will just grow, and you will have more opportunities and massive on a massive scale that you won't get in any other branch. I emphasize huge to all the time, and even to my soldiers and Marines, that they got a network. Remember the people they worked for, who they were under, who they did tasks for, and save those things, because they come in real handy when you get out of the military, whether you retire or end your contract. That network is so powerful in the outside world. A lot of people who get out of the military struggle to find jobs, to find things to do, to equate what they did in the military to a real life job, and having that network and that base is invaluable. And so if you want that network, you want to grow financially, have success outside of the military, not just in it, the Air Force is the one for you. They also have a much better standard of living. Having been stationed on an Air Force base, I got to stay in base housing on a Marine Corps, Army, and an Air Force base. And Army and Marine Corps are comparable. Lots of mold issues, kind of dark, dreary, sad, base housing. But the Air Force base housing was immaculate. A big house, upstairs, downstairs, new carpet, wood flooring. It was amazing. Hands down, best place I've ever lived while being in the military was on an Air Force base. They have the best standard of living, hands down. Navy, if you want to travel the world, or you want your child to travel the world, and you guys want to see the world, open the door, and have experiences you won't have in any other branch, that's the Navy for you. They have the most opportunity to travel around the world, to see the world, to do things you won't be able to do. They pretty much have every single job as you would have in all the branches. You can pretty much do anything from a desk job to flying aircraft, or scuba diving, or underwater welding. They have a mass amount of jobs that are super cool and super interesting. They kind of get a weird rap because in the media and in Hollywood, they're always seen as the Navy SEALs, and they're always jumping in boats and swimming in the ocean and painting their faces black, when I would argue that most of them never do that kind of thing. You don't even have to be that great of a swimmer to be in the Navy. A lot of them aren't even water related. There's a ton of desk jobs. There's a ton of fun hands-on jobs. There's building, construction jobs, whatever you want to do. They have it in the Navy with the opportunity to travel more than most of the other branches. In the 3 months I was on ship with the Navy, I traveled to more countries than I did in any other branch. And that was just 3 months of being on ship with the Navy. If you do join the Navy, try to avoid the giant aircraft carriers or the larger ships because they don't get as many port options as the smaller ships. So I was on a much smaller ship. I got a port pretty much any time we ported, but there are many times where we pulled in and there was not a space for those carriers, and so they had to stay out on the ocean and did not get to go onto the mainland and enjoy their time while we were in that country. So if you get it, try to avoid submarines and large aircraft carriers, but you still will get to travel regardless if you do either of those. Now, coming down to the two that I served in, the Army and the Marines. There's a lot to say about that, but I'll try to keep it short. The Marines, if you lack discipline but have a ton of potential, the Marines are great for you. If you just want a job and you want to serve your country and get that educational benefit and you want to do something kind of like I don't know, more military related where you think you're going to get that real military experience. If you just want to get that, go to the Army. But if you need some discipline, you want a brotherhood, sisterhood, camaraderie, you want to feel empowered and feel like you did something really important and special, I will argue that the Marine Corps instills that in you from day one. You just will not have that in any of the other branches unless you do some sort of special forces. But the first day in the Army, I was asking questions because I'd already been in the Marines for quite a while. I've been in for 8 years, did 6 years active duty. That we had so many different standards that we all knew. You could go to any military base, any Marine Corps base in the world, and you would know what rules you were to follow, and you knew how to respect rank and what to do. In the Army, everywhere I went, there was a different set of rules. There was a different way you wore your uniform, your gear, the way everything was very different depending on where you were at. They had different codes, different code of conduct. Each base had its own code. It was really hard to keep focus on what my lane was in the Army because I don't think anybody really did know their lanes. It felt that way, even though I know up in upper levels of the higher ranks and officers, they did feel like they knew their lanes. I also felt like the Army was very officer driven when I hardly ever saw officers in the Marine Corps. I worked with tons of officers in the Army. It's very officer based. There's so many of them and they run the entire show, and NCOs lack a lot of power in the Army. I had a lot more power in the Marines as an NCO, and leading my Marines was a lot easier to do. Officers tend to understood our position and what we had to do and let us handle those things, while we were very much more micromanaged in the Army. I felt like it was a job I'd show up for, and the level of disrespect from some of the junior soldiers to NCOs was crazy to me. They could get away with a ton, and there wasn't much you could do about it except write them up and try to get them kicked out. In the Marine Corps, you had to have you wanted to get as close to perfect as a PT score or a physical test as you possibly could, and if you didn't, you were garbage. And in the Army, it was basically if you pass, you're good enough. And so that's my take on what the main core differences of the branches are. If you need discipline, want a good experience, the Marines have hardly any money, but tons more opportunity because it's so small. So if you want to go do something, it's a lot easier to do that in the Marine Corps. In the Army, you really have to prove your value before they even consider it. And even after they consider it and they make these promises to you, you probably won't get it. In the Navy, same thing as kind of the Marines, in the fact that if you want to go to schools, you want to learn how to do certain things and upgrade your career sets in certain MOSs, that's a lot easier to do. It just really depends on what lane you want to go into the Navy. So if you're going into the Navy, I'd research the job structures and how they function, because you might see that there are more opportunities in one lane than the other. Not everyone's going to be a maverick. Not everyone is going to be sweeping decks. It's so widely, it's so broad for how the Navy operates. That's one of the main reasons I love the Navy, and their operation is it's just kind of a laid back military environment where you associate with your peers in a more job centered field while still maintaining that discipline and a camaraderie you'll get in the other branches. The Air Force, honestly, besides the JTACs, which are, if you go look those guys up, they're pretty cool. They're probably the coolest part about the Air Force, in my opinion. But besides them, and if you're especially going enlisted, it's almost too laid back for me. It would almost drive me nuts at how buddy they were within the rank structures. I would have not been able to navigate well because I needed to know the structure. I needed to know the lanes. That's why I had a harder time in the Army than the Marines. But the Air Force is even worse. I saw people calling each other by their first names, last names, no rank, no standing at parade rest. It was more of a job than it was a military branch. But that's not for everybody, and I know people who are watching this who are in the Air Force might disagree with me, but it felt a lot more laid back. But the quality of life was something you can't get anywhere else. It was great. I mean, if I could do it again, or most people could do it again, most of them secretly wish they could do the Air Force because it actually looked like a great experience for being in the military because it wasn't quite as hard, to be honest. The Air Force or the Space Force is still pretty new. So it's a growing branch, and they're still absolving, or they're still grabbing a lot of different MOSs from different branches and working mostly with spatial satellites, things to do with outside of the air, land and sea environment, and more into cybersecurity and things like that. Coast Guard, I know probably the least amount, but I have a couple friends that have served. They all had to be really smart to get into the Coast Guard, to be honest. The people I know had to have really solid grades. Many of them, just to go to the enlisted route, still had to have a college degree. What officer wasn't even an option for them at that point. They just had to have a degree to even be considered. But many of them, it's a great gateway if you're going to go into anything like law enforcement, fire, like be a fireman, firewoman. You want to go into one of those like civil duty type jobs, the Coast Guard is great for that. If you want to do any type of search and rescue, Coast Guard is all over it. It's a cool little branch. It's pretty small and pretty elite, but I don't know as much about it as I would like to know, but those who I've met seem to have worked really hard to get into it. So I imagine the caliber of the people that you're working with is a lot higher than any of the other branches you'll be used to. It's pretty easy to get into any of the branches as long as you have a good head on your shoulders. As far as jobs go, the best branch for jobs, it really dependent on what you want to do and what lane. If you're really trying to get that full-on military experience, honestly, the Army is probably the best one. Second, the Marine Corps. You can pretty easily get into a job where you're going to be able to drive and shoot tanks and fire weapons in the Army. They have so much more money than the Marine Corps because they're so much bigger that they get to go do these ranges and these field ops that are pretty massive and pretty technical, while the Marine Corps, in the Marine Corps, we pretend to shoot at barrels because we don't have enough ammunition to actually go to the range and practice. So it just really depends on what kind of experience you want. But when you do train in the Marine Corps, it is hardcore. It is a lot of fun, and you do get an experience you won't get in the Army or any other branch. And that camaraderie and that discipline and those rule sets are something you're not going to find in any other branch. You will know exactly how your uniform needs to look. You will know exactly what you need to do for that day, where you need to be. You will know everything to an annoying millisecond in the Marine Corps, while you have a lot more guesswork in the other branches. So that's my take. Hope it helps. If you have any questions, shoot me an email at lavar@lavarj.com. Comment below on this video, and don't forget to click subscribe. I really appreciate the support, and have a good day.